I never imagined that I would have to step in to protect my own family from a homeowners association, HOA. But when my uncle, Jonathan Thompson, found himself in the middle of a battle, I realized that corruption can seep into even the most ordinary places. I am Ethan Carter, Attorney General of the United States, and for over 20 years, I have fought against financial crimes and abuses of power. I have taken down corporate corruption, exposed fraudulent organizations, and prosecuted high-level officials, but I never expected that one of my biggest battles would be against a small HOA in a quiet neighborhood. My uncle, Jonathan Thompson, and my aunt, Marie, were the definition of hard-working middle-class Americans. They had lived in Fairview Estates for 35 years, believing it to be their forever home. They weren't wealthy, but they lived comfortably, always contributing to their community, following the rules, and staying out of trouble. They never expected that one day, they would become the targets of a corrupt system designed to squeeze every last penny from them. After decades of saving and planning, Jonathan and Marie decided it was time to sell their home and retire. They found a young couple eager to buy their house at full market value. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Then, the HOA stepped in. Just days before the sale was finalized, Jonathan received a notice from the HOA, which read, "Per our newly updated regulations, all new buyers in Fairview Estates must pay a $10,000 transfer fee before completing a home purchase. This ensures that incoming residents meet the community's standards." Jonathan was stunned. Not once in his 35 years living there had he ever heard of such a rule. No prior announcement, no discussion among residents, just a sudden demand for an outrageous sum of money. Jonathan immediately scheduled a meeting with Richard Dawson, the HOA president, demanding an explanation. But what Richard said only fueled his anger. "Richard Dawson, we need to ensure that those moving in are the right kind of people. We can't just let anyone live here without financial safeguards." "Jonathan, what are you talking about? The couple buying my house are financially stable. They've been approved for a mortgage, have excellent credit, and most importantly, they are willing to pay fair market value." "Richard Dawson, then they can prove it by paying the transfer fee. If they can't afford an extra $10,000, maybe they aren't the right fit for our community." Jonathan left the meeting seething with rage. This wasn't about community standards. This was a scam. A deliberate attempt to control the real estate market and force sellers into compliance. Jonathan refused to pay. That was when the real battle began. Within a week, Jonathan's mailbox was flooded with violation notices. White heavy checkmark, grass too long. Despite being trimmed weekly, his lawn was suddenly deemed out of compliance. White heavy checkmark, house color violation. His home, painted 5 years ago with HOA approval, was now mysteriously in violation of the rules. White heavy checkmark, misuse of property. A vague charge with no explanation, simply a tool to force more fines onto him. Each notice came with a financial penalty. In just 2 months, Jonathan and Marie owed over $5,000 in bogus fines, effectively blocking them from selling their home. This was no longer a disagreement. This was war. But what the HOA didn't know was who they were dealing with. Jonathan wasn't just another retiree. He was a former financial investigator, specializing in corporate fraud. And he decided to fight back. He began digging into the HOA's finances, examining every transaction over the last 5 years. What he uncovered even shocked me. The $10,000 transfer fee wasn't listed anywhere in the HOA bylaws. The HOA had extracted over $200,000 in fabricated fees from homeowners in just 2 years. Not a single dollar of HOA funds had been used for community improvements. Fairview Estates HOA wasn't a community organization. It was a criminal operation. Realizing he needed more firepower, Jonathan called me. And that's when the real fight began. When my uncle called me, I was in my office, knee-deep in federal cases, but the tone of his voice made me drop everything. "Ethan, I need your help. I'm up against a corrupt HOA, and if we don't do something, they'll keep preying on people like me." I had prosecuted CEOs, politicians, and crime syndicates, but even I wasn't prepared for the level of corruption I found in this HOA. I told Jonathan to send me everything he had, the violation notices, the new HOA rules, and any financial records he could obtain. As I sifted through the documents, I was appalled. A small HOA had extorted over $2 million from homeowners through fabricated fines and fraudulent fees. This wasn't about maintaining a community. This was organized racketeering. When Jonathan refused to comply, the HOA escalated their tactics. Keycap 1 daily violation notices. Every morning, a new bogus citation appeared in his mailbox. Keycap 2 targeting his neighbors. Anyone who supported Jonathan suddenly found themselves under HOA scrutiny. Keycap 3 smear campaign. HOA officials emailed residents, painting Jonathan and Marie as troublemakers trying to disrupt the community. This wasn't just harassment. This was a coordinated attack. I knew we couldn't let it stand. I wasn't just a U.S. Attorney General. I had a legal team, government resources, and political influence. Step 1. Launch a financial investigation. I requested an independent audit of Fairview Estates HOA, demanding full transparency on financial records. Step 2. Expose them publicly. I reached out to a top investigative journalist, providing him with a dossier on the HOA's corruption. Step 3. File a lawsuit against the HOA. I connected Jonathan with a law firm specializing in HOA abuse, preparing a massive lawsuit against Fairview Estates. Small Blue Diamond, the financial audit revealed massive fraud. Small Blue Diamond residents rebelled against the HOA, demanding resignations. Small Blue Diamond, the HOA president and 2 board members were arrested for embezzlement. 6 months later, Fairview Estates HOA was dissolved. Jonathan and Marie finally sold their home and retired in peace. But for me, this battle was far from over. Through my investigation, I discovered HOA corruption was a nationwide issue. I proposed federal legislation to regulate HOA abuses, including white heavy checkmark mandatory financial transparency, white heavy checkmark limits on fine powers, white heavy checkmark stronger homeowner rights. Months later, the law passed with bipartisan support. The war against corrupt HOAs had just begun. I have prosecuted billion-dollar fraud cases, taken down corrupt government officials, and dismantled criminal organizations. But what happened with HOAs across America shook me in a way that few cases ever had. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about power, unchecked, absolute power wielded by a small group of people over innocent homeowners, using loopholes, intimidation, and legal trickery to strip them of their rights. The case against Fairview Estates HOA was only the beginning. Once we exposed their corruption, the floodgates opened. Thousands of homeowners reached out with their own horror stories, and what I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about power, unchecked, absolute power wielded by a small group of people over innocent homeowners, using loopholes, intimidation, and legal trickery to strip them of their rights. The case against Fairview Estates HOA was only the beginning. Once we exposed their corruption, the floodgates opened. Thousands of homeowners reached out with their own horror stories, and what I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. After dismantling Fairview Estates HOA, I formed a federal task force to investigate HOA corruption nationwide. We created a hotline for homeowners to report abuse, and within just 3 months, we received over 2,500 reports from 37 states. What we uncovered was staggering. An HOA in Florida had embezzled over $5 million from homeowners over a decade. A Texas HOA was caught fraudulently foreclosing on homes, then selling them to board members' relatives at below-market prices. In California, a high-end HOA funneled community funds into a landscaping company owned by the HOA president. This wasn't mismanagement. This was organized fraud and extortion, protected by weak state laws. If we were going to fix this broken system, we needed federal action. With the evidence in hand, I presented my findings to Congress. Most lawmakers had no idea how much power HOAs had until we showed them the data. So I drafted the first federal legislation to regulate HOAs nationwide. White heavy checkmark mandatory financial transparency. All HOA finances must be publicly available to residents. White heavy checkmark restrictions on fines. HOAs cannot impose arbitrary penalties without a clear appeals process. White heavy checkmark limits on foreclosure powers. HOAs cannot seize homes over unpaid fines without a legal review. White heavy checkmark homeowner rights protections. Federal oversight to ensure fair treatment. This bill would finally end the unchecked tyranny of corrupt HOA boards. When I stood before Congress and the American public, I made one thing clear. HOAs were meant to build communities, not destroy them. We're putting power back where it belongs, with the homeowners. The message resonated. Within 6 months, the nationwide HOA Reform Act passed with bipartisan support. For the first time in U.S. history, HOAs were being held accountable at a federal level. With new federal oversight, law enforcement agencies across the country began cracking down on corrupt HOAs. Small Blue Diamond, the president of Fairview Estates HOA, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud. Small Blue Diamond multiple HOA boards were dismantled and restructured. Small Blue Diamond homeowners finally had the legal tools to fight back. But the biggest victory? People were no longer afraid to stand up for themselves. Homeowners across the country started pushing back, filing lawsuits, attending HOA meetings, and demanding transparency. For decades, HOAs ruled through fear and intimidation. Now, that era was over. Through all of this, my uncle just wanted one thing: to sell his home and retire in peace. After HOA Fairview Estates was dissolved, Jonathan and Marie finally completed the sale. The day they moved, their neighbors threw them a farewell party, thanking them for standing up. As I watched Jonathan smile for the first time in months, I knew this wasn't just about him anymore. He had set a precedent, proving that no HOA was above the law. And that was a victory that would last far beyond this case. HOAs were never meant to be dictatorships. They were never meant to strip homeowners of their rights. Yet for decades, they operated unchecked, preying on innocent families. That time is over. Lightbulb, know your rights. Demand transparency. Fight back. Lightbulb, if an HOA tries to take advantage of you, stand up. You are not alone. Because now, for the first time ever, the law is finally on your side. Balance scale, justice has been served. Balance scale.